Right? You coming?
I was waiting for you to leave.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that. You're the only one to stay up here. Yeah, so I'm Mark Whittaker. As Ann said, I'm her husband. We've been married for 25 years, and I think I met Omer and Phyllis maybe 7 years before that. So I've kind of starting to get a little history with them, and I think I've gotten to know them a little bit. So I'm going to get into Sam's story here, but a little bit of my own. I remember when I was first getting to know Omer. You know, we'd go out on a hike, and I quickly realized that my idea of a hike and his idea of a hike were a little bit different, and I soon came to expect that if he suggested going out for a hike, I'd be coming back with a backpack full of rocks. But that's okay. Each rock came with a lesson, a geology lesson, and so I got paid in that way, I guess. Sam Dennis, Sam would love to be here, but he lives up in Alaska, and it's just kind of a big trip. And but Sam was a field assistant for Omer back in the 80s at some time, early 80s, right?
Yeah.
Early 80s. And had some great experiences with him. So he sent some stories that he wanted everybody to hear about. So I'm just going to read. I'm going to read Sam's stories here. So keep in mind, this is Sam's words. So when you hear the word I, it's not me, it's Sam. So I'm reading Sam's stories. So he says, so Sam says, at the end of the summer field season in 1982, Omer and I were driving from Glacier Park back to Denver. After a long day on the road, we pulled into Lander, Wyoming for the night. We checked into the motel and carried in our bags. Then Omer pulled out the gin, vermouth, and olives and asked if I wanted a martini. I'd never had a martini, but of course I said yes. He then proceeded to provide careful instruction in the proper way to make a martini. The part I particularly remember was that the proper amount of vermouth was obtained, filling the glass with gin, then waving the vermouth bottle over the glass, but to make sure the cap was still screwed on tight. Although I can't say I found the result very tasty, in my maturity I have come to appreciate a good martini, and it always makes me think of Omer. So let's see, we're going to go on. He's got a couple stories here, so they're all pretty good. They're all based on this field work with Omer in Glacier. Next one, he says, when Jim, the party chief, arrived, he was going to share a trailer with Omer. After dinner and discussion of the next day's field work, everyone adjourned to their trailers. Rising early the next morning, I was walking to the showers when the tailgate of Jim's pickup fell open and a very haggard-looking Jim crawled out. He related that upon going to bed, Omer had instantly fallen asleep, then started loudly snoring. Jim first tried earplugs, and when those didn't work, moved outside to the back of his truck, and when that didn't work, tried the earplugs in the truck, but was still kept awake much of the night by the deafening sounds coming from the trailer. From that point on, if space allowed, Omer got a trailer for himself. So another story Sam passes on. This is a pretty good one. I love this story. Omer was doing field work in the Paradox Basin in the mid-1950s, and he was at a gas station in Moab filling up his Jeep. An older gentleman was at an adjacent pump and walked over and struck up a conversation and asked what Omer was doing. When Omer told him he was doing geology, the man asked him how the Jeep was working out. Omer said it was working out fine and he hadn't had any issues. The man then asked where they could be obtained, and Omer told him he thought there was a dealership in Grand Junction. This famous reply was, "I've got to get me some of those." And then he gestured at his car and he says, "These Cadillacs aren't worth a damn in the field." Then he gave Omer his card. It was H.L. Hunt, the founder of Hunt Oil, and at the time of his death, reputed to be the richest man in the world. So yeah, that's kind of funny. So that's Sam Dennis's stories. All right, back to Ann.
Back to Ann. Next up is longtime family friend Van Hilty. And Van will have a very different take, I think, on Omer.
I just had a knee replacement, so.
Yeah, you gotta loosen it up a bit.
So, I'm the wrong person to be up here because my father and my mother introduced Omer and Phyllis, or at least that's how the rumor went, and that's how I heard it. And so, all the gossip, all the good stories, everything that we all would love to know is in Phyllis's head, and she'll have to tell you sometime how all that occurred. But when I came along, I was looking at the thing. My dad was 20 years older, and then Omer was 14 years older than me. And my dad called me up one day and he said, "I have these special friends, and they live in Lakewood, and they need a house. They want to sell their house in Lakewood and move back to Boulder." Now, my dad had a hard time because my degree was in art, and so he never ever introduced me as as a real estate agent. I mean, it was just something that was outside of his purview. But at least he introduced me to Phyllis and Omer, and I went out to Lakewood and saw this large house, and they said, "Well, we want to get a smaller house in Boulder, but we do have one requirement. We need a place where we can put 2 grand pianos together like this so that we can play and enjoy our life and continue with our music." And I'm sitting there going, "I want a small house with 2 grand pianos." So we looked around and we ended up on Bear Mountain Drive in Rockmount, and there was a McStain house. And I'm going, well, the house is okay. Not sure where you're going to put the grand pianos. And they go, well, when you walk in the door, there's a space there, and I think both of those pianos will fit. And I'm going, that's true. And then there's this fireplace. And they go, that's not going to be a problem. They'll just knock out the wall, add to the house, have a beautiful view, which is what they did. So they ended up creating a gorgeous home, a place that you could sit and relax and enjoy life. And then during this time, I got to actually get to know Phyllis and Omer. And I don't know many Renaissance people, what I would call a Renaissance man. But Omer was one of those people. He knew music, did the bell choir, played the organ. Of course, my dad was an organist, did bell choir. And at the same time, he was a scientist. And he did have that ability just to make science easy. And then he was an artist. And craftsman to I guess that's come because he's a scientist too. Because I'm an artist who doesn't have the craftsman personality. So Omer was what I would call an absolute joy to be around. But I could never say Omer. It was always Omer and Phyllis. Or should I say Phyllis and Omer, because they were basically totally equal people. And I loved them immensely. you'd walk in the house and you felt at home. They just brought you in. And so I appreciate them totally and highly. Thanks.
Give me a sign there, Steve. Come on up. So Steve Hamilton is my first cousin and Mom's brother's son. Gotta get all this stuff. And I'll let him take it away. Steve.
It's gonna be kind of hard because the van boat was my hero. But I remember when I was a young boy, he put a piece of granite in my hand. He said, now this rock is over 1 billion years old. And I looked at that rock and my little brain just couldn't comprehend that. And I thought to myself, wow, that must be older than God. But the story I remember the most, we were hiking, or we were driving up into the state park, and we were stopping at places along the way, and he was telling us all about what we were seeing as we stopped. And we stopped at one particular spot, and there was a guide with some other people over next to us. And he was explaining to us all about what had happened there. And pretty soon I turned around, and all the people from the guide were now standing behind Uncle Omer listening to him tell the story instead of the guide. But what a wonderful man he was. He taught me so much about life and science, and just, he was my hero.
Thanks, Steve. Bruce, I think you're up.
Just want to say thank you to everyone who's spoken so far. It's really meaningful. Thanks, Steve. Okay. My name is Bruce. I'm Homer and Phyllis's son. And it could probably go without saying, but Dad had a big influence on me. I'll share just a few stories from my childhood that I think shed light on the fatherhood facet of Homer. When I was young, Dad spent a lot of time in his wood shop in the basement. I would spend time there as well, and I can still remember the relaxed atmosphere and the smells of freshly cut wood. Dad would give me projects to keep me busy, suited to my ability. After I'd graduated beyond the hammer nails into a board stage, Dad gave me the idea of hollowing out short lengths of dowel, filling them with water, and plugging both ends, and then throwing them in the fireplace to see if they would pop. The results were always a little disappointing, but anyway. Dad was a geologist at the USGS and worked at the Denver Federal Center, which is in Lakewood, by the way. Sometime in the 1970s, there was a fire in one of the labs there, and while the building wasn't damaged too heavily, that I remember anyway, there was a lot of smoke damage, and a lot of stuff was being thrown out because of the smoky patina on the packaging. Seeing an opportunity, my dad brought home a number of jars of chemicals that were smoky on the outside, but perfectly good on the inside. Around the same time, a colleague of my dad's, Jerry Tucker, gave me a book, a photocopied manuscript really, called The Manufacture of Fireworks with Homemade Equipment. Jerry also helped my dad build me a really nice cannon, but that's another story. Anyway, the lucky convergence between chemical availability and know-how in the form of that book meant that for a few years I had a hobby that was exciting for me
and my next door neighbor and best friend, Todd Gander, and I heard later, terrifying for others in the neighborhood. My dad encouraged me in this activity, but everything had to be done under his supervision. I tested this only once, kind of by accident, and it got me into trouble. Many of you might know that Dad wasn't much for exercise. He was openly disdainful of it, actually. But there was one sport he excelled at, and that was ping pong. He had wicked English, and I looked forward to mean games with him almost every evening. On other evenings, I would play board games with my mom at the kitchen table. Also fond memories. During my late junior high and high school summers, Dad was part of a USGS team that was updating the geologic maps of Glacier National Park. Many stories were born of this time. We had many fantastic hikes, a multi-day horseback traverse, and I had my first helicopter ride. My sister Ann is still justifiably miffed that I got to go and she didn't. But she got her comeuppance later. But, I was tasked with testing for carbonate rocks by putting a drop of hydrochloric acid on them and seeing if they fizzed. I got a kick out of telling my friends at school that fall that I spent the summer dropping acid. I think it was during this time that I started to see Dad from an adult perspective for the first time, by observing his interactions with his peers and the field assistants. And the stories from Sam we heard a bit ago have added to that perspective. Dad's influences on me were numerous. He was the first to introduce me to science through his road trip lectures on geology and by giving me a wall-sized periodic table of the elements. I was bitten by the travel bug early, and that influence came from Mom and Ann as well. Dad and Mom encouraged both Ann and me to travel abroad as exchange students. And Dad not only taught us that we could do what we wanted to in life, but demonstrated this as well. For example, by taking on big projects such as building a harpsichord. There is a line, perhaps a wide line, between dying too early, tragically, and dying too late, perhaps in drawn-out agony. Dad was sharp to the end, though his body was making life increasingly difficult. Dad had a full and rich life, and I would say he walked that line very well. Thank you.
That's the end of our list of speakers. If there's anybody else that would care to come up and share any memories, any stories, this would be a great time for it. Come on down.
We also have a mic.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, we can walk this out.
Okay. But you can come up. I'll come.
All right.
My name is Jim Brokaw, and my memory of Omer was when I was a kid in grade school in Grand Junction. He came to work for the USGS in the early 50s, worked for my father, who was the chief of the Colorado Plateau Project. And he moved into a basement room of my mom and dad's house. And among the various things that he did in that small room, he had made 2 desert terrariums out of giant pickle bottles and installed in them brown desert scorpions. The scorpions have to eat. And the terrariums were there for quite a while until my dad saw one of my sisters bringing a small jar of small grasshoppers into the house and asked her why she was bringing bugs into the house, and she says, they're for Omer's scorpions. Not too long after that, he was returning them to their natural habitat out by the book cliffs. My other memory is of Omer playing the organ. He gave a recital at one of the only churches in Grand Junction that had a full pipe organ. And I don't remember all of the first pieces, but the last piece was a Bach composition. And it was really complicated and lightning fast on the keyboards, but just before the end of the piece, Omer stopped playing, grabbed the bench with both of his hands, and played the longest fastest solo with his feet on the pedals that I have ever seen before or since. He never missed a pedal, he didn't miss a note, and it was the best memory I have of Homer.
Anyone else? Rolf. Neat.
Hi, Ann.
Hi, Rolf. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Hi, my name is Rolf Dale, and I'm kind of representing the Balfour Senior Living contingent sitting in the back there. Homer and Phyllis and Charlie, one cannot forget Charlie, lived at Balfour for a number of years up until just a couple of years ago. My first exposure to Homer was on a day trip. So aside from being an evening concierge there at that time, I take people on trips, and I took them on day trips. And it just so happened that probably the first trip that I recall that Phyllis and Homer came on one of my day trips, we were at Red Rocks. And as I was driving around there, he said, would you like me to talk about this at all? Sure. Why? Well, I have a PhD in geology, and I'm kind of familiar with this. Oh, have at it. So I handed him the mic, and he decided to give us proceeded to give us a nice demonstration of all things rock that had anything to do with red rocks, and I learned about hogbacks and all sorts of really neat things. And that made such an impact, both on me and also on the rest of the people that were on that trip. It got to a point where when we were about to go on a trip, and I had more than a couple people ask me, is Homer coming? Yes, cool, I'm going. So his renditions of what was going on there, his instruction about that were very well received, and I gotta say, he kind of started to remind me a little bit of Carl Sagan as he was talking about the rocks being 1 billion years old. We ultimately took an overnight trip where we went and had lunch at the Stanley, and we had a geological tour of Trail Ridge Road. And we stayed overnight over in the other side. Grand Lake, thank you. We stayed in the Grand Lake Lodge there, and there's no question that Homer was deeply enthused about his subject. And as we were driving and he stopped and talked about all sorts of things, I became very clear on what an alluvial fan is. And that enthusiasm resulted in us having to seriously hightail it to the hotel so we could get there before dinner, before the restaurant was going to close. Just about ran over some moose. But anyway, it was great having Homer there. He had a speaking style that is kind of personal to me, that he would say things in certain ways that reminded me of my dad a lot, so I had a real warm spot for him for that. So loved my time with Homer and Phyllis, and very glad I could be here with you today. Thank you.
Time for another woman, isn't it?
Yes.
I'm here because my husband, Bill Bradley, taught at the University of Colorado, and Homer was one of his favorite grad students, and I think the feeling was mutual. And at that time, we were so young that our best companions were our grad students and their wives. And so Phyllis and I were learning how to be wives and mothers at the time that they were doing their geology. One of the better stories there was that baby Ann and my Melanie were busying themselves in the bathroom. I don't know, who'd care? We were having coffee in the kitchen, and then we realized there was sound of water, and it turns out they were flooding the bathroom, but they climbed in the bathtub so they would stay dry.
anyone else, I can bring the mic to you if you don't want to come up front.
My name is John Gallagher, and my connection to Omer is in the base section of Trinity Methodist Church. In 1990, Omer was 60, and I wasn't. Omer introduced me to the fine art of singing bass. My wife had just gotten the organist job at Trinity, and so it was very interesting to be back in the bass section with Phyllis about as far away from us as she is right now, looking sternly over the top of her glasses at these two basses back there that might have been talking about Glacier National Park. They might have been creating chaos with the altos who were sitting in front of us. And I thought, when I first saw him, this is the most straightforward guy I've ever seen in my life. He's probably doesn't even know how to kid around, but I found out that that was wrong. And it was great. The other thing that, in addition to teaching me how to sing, and he says, you know, you can hit that low C. And I did, and he says, see, I told you could do that. We had a great time, learned a lot from him about music. But in addition to that, and it's already been spoken today, he was a surrogate father to me. I'd lost my dad 16 years earlier. And Omer just had that touch, that knew what to say at the right time. Thank you.
Anyone else? Let's, I think everybody's got a card that's got the words for Be Thou My Vision. Let's sing it together. Shall we stand to sing it? Mom will tell you it's the best way to get the good breath.